Hello, my name's Alan Saunders, and I'm a friend of the Stronghold. Not a member, just a friend, but I've been a friend for very, very many years. Um, I'm going to just share with you my story of how I came to faith in Jesus. It's a long story. I'm going to try and keep it relatively short, and I hope it'll be a real encouragement and a help to you. So, as I've already said, my name's Alan, and you can tell by my accent I'm not from round these parts. I'm from the south coast. I was born in Poole in Dorset, and I was the youngest of eight children. Um, Sadly, my mum just really had, I guess, bad postnatal depression and decided that she didn't want to keep me. And so, as a baby, I was put up for adoption and I was adopted by a couple. And sadly, tragedy struck quite early on in that my adopted father died while I was still very young. If I'm honest, I don't have any memories of him at all. Although, obviously, as a toddler, I would have known him and I'm sure he loved me very much, but I've just got no recollection. So, really, as a child growing up in the 70s and into my teenage years, going into the 1980s, I was a really hurting young man. Obviously, I suffered a few knockbacks, and as I was growing up, kind of like towards the latter end of primary school, my mum had a nervous breakdown. I went into care for a short while and was in a children's home, and it was quite idyllic in some ways. I enjoyed it. And then I came home. My mum had remarried, but I didn't really get on with my stepfather. And so I used to play truant from school. And I ended up in the care system again when I was in about year seven, year eight of secondary school. And so I went into care again, lived in North Dorset in the countryside, probably why I got a bit of a farmer accent. And then my mum, adopted mother, got divorced, and I went back to live at home with her. And by now I was about 14, 15, and so I finished my secondary schooling in Poole in Dorset, which was the town where I was born. Obviously, my education had been a bit disrupted by all of this. Apparently, I was a really bright lad and I should have gone to grammar school. But because of my family background, I was at that time really disqualified from going just because it was all a bit of a mess. So, as a youngster, I left school at 16. I hadn't really tried hard at school, so I'd got a few qualifications, but I hadn't really achieved anything like my potential. And so at 16, I started working, I started earning money. And for a young lad, that was great because then I had money. And so my life just changed in many ways. At that time, I thought it was fantastic. But I would go out on a Friday night and a Saturday night with my friends drinking. And then gradually, as I earned more money, I would go out more and more. Most nights of the week, probably 4 or 5 nights a week, I would go to the pub, drink heavily, have fun, or so I thought. And just that was my whole life, really. I lived for going out. My mum married again, and now I was about 18. And again, this stepdad, we clashed. Um, it was difficult. And so I was thrown out of home at 18. And I went back, beat up my stepdad, went to court, and got some, I can't remember what I did get now. a caution, I think, or something like that. Anyway, I kind of got off with it, but it was on my record, assault. Anyway, I kind of drifted from job to job, and just was a young man really who was wasting his life and not fulfilling any kind of potential. And then I met this guy who was a bit of a character. He was a gypsy lad. He was 6'7" tall, giant of a fella, and he always had loads and loads of money. And it was obvious that he was involved in criminal activity, and so I got involved with him. And we used to steal jewellery from jewellers' shops in the West Country, and we'd go to different towns in Devon and Cornwall and Somerset. We'd scope them out, and I would go in and try and ask to see the most expensive items and snatch them and run away. And my mate used to wait in a getaway car, and we'd drive off. And this one time, it was about March time, 1986, we were in Taunton in Somerset, and I'd stolen a diamond and platinum ring that was £3,000. We're talking 1986, so it was a lot of money. Well, it's a lot of money now, but obviously even more money then. And my mate was waiting away down through a park on the other side of the park in the getaway car. Anyway, as I ran out of the shop, I was chased by a policeman. Back in the day, I could run. I was quite a good cross-country runner, and I managed to escape from him. And my mate was waiting with a getaway car, which was a Mini with a boot that you pulled down to open to get in. So I was going to hide in the boot in case they were on the radio and looking, and gave a description of me. They wouldn't see me because I'd be in the boot of a Mini. It was a stupid plan. I realise that now. It was a big mistake, because as he held the boot door open, I jumped in, but my weight went on the door, and the boot door just came right away, and we couldn't get in there. So he threw the thing on the back seat. I ran off. The police came round the corner. I'm not sure what happened, and I just hid for a while. Eventually, when I thought it was safe to get out, I managed to find a taxi driver who drove me back from Taunton, Somerset to Bournemouth in Dorset that night. And the fare was probably, even back then, was about 60 quid, which was a lot of money. And I went to the house of a guy who handled stolen goods, known as a fence. And I went there, and he gave me some money, and I paid the taxi driver, and I disposed of the ring. Now, obviously, this taxi driver realised, when perhaps he saw it on the news or read in the newspaper what had happened, and he told the police. And so the police knew where I'd gone to, and actually had been to the house of this fence. I didn't know this, and arrested his son, because his son looked a little bit similar to me, but they realised they hadn't got the right man. Anyway, I was just staying at a friend's house. I was sleeping on their sofa and wondering what to do. And I went round, we're talking a few weeks after this, to visit my mother. And really, I was on the scrounge. I just needed money. I was just, in a difficult position. And as I sat in my mother's lounge, speaking to her, she said this to me. She said, "Alan, you'll never be happy in life until you get right with God." Well, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't really interested in what she had to say. I didn't really care. The story was that my mum had been a Christian as a teenager growing up, and she'd married someone who wasn't a Christian. And in her mind, she'd felt she'd committed some kind of sin that meant she couldn't be forgiven and she shouldn't go to church anymore. And so for decades, like 20 years, she'd never set foot inside a church because she felt so unworthy. God had clearly done something in her life. She'd gone back with God and she'd been praying for me. So she said to me, you'll never be happy in life until you get right with God. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't interested. And then she said this, she said, Alan, can I pray for you? And I thought, oh, I don't really want you to pray. It was awkward. It was embarrassing. I thought, oh no, but it's your mum. So I thought, well, you can pray. So I lied to her. I said, yeah, sure, you can pray. I don't mind. And so she prayed. She was really embarrassed as well. And she just prayed a simple one-sentence prayer that went like this. Lord Jesus, would you reveal yourself to Alan? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sat in her lounge, just like I'm sat here talking to you from my lounge. I didn't hear a voice from heaven. I didn't see my name written in the sky or anything like that. But what happened was that I just became overwhelmed with this sense of sorrow and guilt. Now, I didn't understand what was happening at the time. Looking back, I can understand it was what the Bible calls being convicted of sin. I realised that I wasn't a good person. I know it sounds stupid. I was a thief. I was a drunk. Did all sorts of terrible things. But I genuinely believed because I was English, therefore I was a Christian, therefore I was a good person. It's pathetic. It was based totally on ignorance, but that's what I genuinely believed. And suddenly I became aware that I was a bad person, and actually more than that, that there was a hell, and that's where I was going. And I just started weeping. It was April the 1st, 1986. Can you believe it? April Fool's Day. And I was crying my eyes out. I thought I was hard. I thought I was tough and everything else. And there I was weeping. And my poor old mum, she didn't know what to do. I mean, she'd done all the right stuff. She'd prayed. She'd shared with me. She'd prayed for me. But she didn't know how to lead me to the Lord. She didn't expect anything to happen. And so she rang a lady from her church, and this lady rang her husband, and he called in on his way home from work. And he told me his story of how he became a Christian in the 1950s when he did his national service, and he became a Christian in the army. And then he shared clearly with me what the gospel was, what the message of Jesus was, that Jesus died on the cross for your sin, that Jesus died in your place, and he took the punishment of God so that you could be forgiven. And all of a sudden, things kind of slipped into place. And I realised that God had made a way for me to be right with him, that it wasn't dependent on anything good or bad that I'd done, but it was all about what Jesus had done at the cross. And then he asked me a simple question. He said, do you want to give your life to Jesus? And I call it the hardest thing in the world and the easiest thing in the world at the same time, because I realised that all my life I've been wrong about God. But it was easy because I recognised that actually there was no other way. There was no other way for me. And so it sounds crazy, and I haven't done it that often since, but we knelt down together in my mum's lounge and he prayed a prayer committing himself to Christ, and he just led me in a prayer. And so I prayed a prayer to invite Jesus to come into my life, to forgive my sin, to wash me clean. And I also remember he asked me if I'd ever been involved in the occult, and I'd had one experience of a Ouija board which had really frightened me. And so I said, I did the Ouija board once. And he said, well, you need to ask God to forgive you specifically for that. So I did. I asked God to forgive me for that. And that's never been an issue for me ever since. But God kind of set me free immediately. Now, what happened is obviously nobody knew where I was living or anything like that. I was kind of drifting from house to house. I was, in one sense, I was technically homeless. So I remember walking back to where I was staying that night, and I remember thinking, if God is real, He's made all of this. I looked up at the stars, and it was a kind of a bit like Abraham in Genesis, where he looks up at the sky and God speaks to him. And it was like, the God who's made the universe, He's speaking to me. He's interested in me. And I thought, well, if God created the universe, if He genuinely did that, then surely He'll be able to help me to change. And so I went back to where I was staying. The next day, I got up, and I was in the town called Poole, and there's a park quite near the town centre. And by the park, there's a police station. And as I walked through the park, I just came to the police station, and I knew that I had to hand myself into the police and confess to what I'd done. So I walked into the station, spoke to the sergeant on the desk, said, I think you might be looking for me. And he said, oh, what's that? And I explained what I'd done. And he said, oh, come in then. And he opened the door. And as I walked in, he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, Alan Saunders, I'm arresting you on suspicion of theft. And they rang some police in Taunton in Somerset, and two detectives drove down, collected me and took me back to Taunton in Somerset. By now, obviously, it was in the evening. I can't remember what time. And so actually they held me in the cells overnight before I was interviewed the next day. But here's the amazing thing. I was in a prison cell, and there was just like a mattress covered in like plastic, really. I think I had a blanket and possibly a pillow. But I got on that bed and I slept so soundly because I had peace in my heart. For the first time in many, many years, I just had a real sense of peace. And it's something that I've learned that God gives to those who love Him, that He does give us peace. He gives us shalom, which means peace in all sorts of areas. But I had real peace and I slept so well. I confessed to all the crimes I'd been involved in, and there was a bit of a dilemma about whether they're going to let me go or not. And believe it or not, that same night there was a guy got arrested for drunk driving. Believe it or not, he was an ambulance driver. Probably was going to lose his job as a result of it. But he got arrested for drunk driving, but he lived in the same town as me. And the police persuaded this guy to give me a lift home. And this guy drove me all the way back. On the way home, he had about 5 or 6 pints on the way home. And I was thinking, oh, what is going on? This is crazy. This is mental. But if you know anything about the way the Lord deals with us, sometimes things happen and you think this just makes no sense whatsoever. But anyway, this guy drove me back, and I rocked up at my mum's house again. She'd been a bit concerned because one day I'd given my life to Jesus Christ, and then the next day I just completely disappeared off the face of the earth, and nobody could find me or trace me or anything like that. Anyway, I told, I think I did tell her. I can't remember if I told her then what had happened. But anyway, I was part of a church. I was in a group with a load of folks who were kind of in their 20s. One of the guys in that group was a guy called Graham. He was a solicitor, worked for the Crown Prosecution Service, and he was like my mentor. And I used to meet with him every week, and we would read the Bible together, and he would teach me and disciple me, and we would pray together. He prayed for me to be filled with the Holy Spirit, and God gave me the gift of tongues, and my life was really rapidly changing. Anyway, it came to the point where I was to go to court for the crimes I'd been involved in, and I had a Christian lawyer who said, in all honesty, Alan, I think because of the seriousness of your crimes, you're going to be looking at a custodial sentence. But hopefully, they'll take into account that you've given yourself up. You weren't caught. They weren't onto you. You've confessed to everything. Best case, you might get 6 months in prison. Anyway, I can remember I went to Taunton Crown Court and I stood in the dock. Obviously, there was no trial because I'd pleaded guilty, and the whole standing before the judge was really quite a brief moment. But I can remember standing there, and in my heart, I'd prepared myself to go to prison. But I'll be honest with you, I was scared. I was really scared. And, it's one thing to talk all and live it large and think you're all hard on the outside, but the thought of going to prison was really quite frightening. Anyway, I stood before the judge. They read out the charges and they said a few things. The prosecution said what they did, and my defence said stuff. I can't really remember what was said. And then the judge summed up and he said, I'm not going to give you a custodial sentence. And I just breathed a sigh of relief, and I was so pleased I wasn't going to prison. He said, I'm not going to put you on probation. I'm not going to fine you. I'm going to give you 140 hours community service, which was a very minor sentence for the seriousness of the crimes. In fact, I served a lot of that sentence working with the youth group in our local church. But he did say this. He said, I can't make you do this, but if you've really changed, like you say you've changed, then I'm going to put you on your honour to contact the people that you've stolen from and offer to pay them back. So I agreed. I said I would do it, and I did. I wrote to all the different shops that I'd stolen from. Amazingly, some of them said, you don't have to pay us back. It was covered by insurance. But others said, we'd be very glad for you to pay us back. And so I endeavoured to pay back from the people I'd stole from. And I paid like £5 one week, £10 another, £20 another, whatever I could afford. I would divvy it up and pay back to the different people that I'd stolen from. It took me 14 years to eventually clear the final one, and in a sense, I was free in that sense that I didn't owe any money to anyone that I'd stolen from. And so it was a big price to pay, but in many ways I was glad to do it because God had completely changed my life. So obviously God has completely transformed my life, and that happened. The start of that story when I came to faith was in April 1986. So that's like 34 years ago. God's been with me all the way through that. I'm not going to say life's always wonderful because it's not. But here's the one thing I want to say is that obviously life can throw all kinds of curveballs at us. All kinds of things can happen. Good things and bad things. But the one thing I've found in the last 34 years is that God is faithful. He does promise, Jesus, to say, he says this, I will never leave you or forsake you. And I've found that to be true in the good times and in the low points of my life when things have gone wrong. Jesus has never left me. He's always been with me. And the one thing that stirs me, because as many of you know, I work as an evangelist. A lot of the time I've been on the road with Mike, walking around different nations of Europe. I've also working in local church as well as an evangelist, sharing the love of Jesus and the message with Jesus with people as I go along. But here's the thing. I know this, that the gospel message, it's the message of salvation for everyone who believes. As Paul writes in the book of Romans, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. For in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed. And here's the thing. If God can save me and transform me, I believe he can save and transform anyone. So if you're listening to this story, I hope it's encouraged you. I hope it's helped you. But I'd say this to you. If you haven't yet given your life to Jesus, I would strongly urge you to do it. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So know this, Jesus does love us. He gave his life for us on the cross. He rose again from the dead so that we could be forgiven and know a new life. And the thing is this, you could know a new life today. You could have a fresh start even today. So I'd ask you, if you don't know Jesus yet, why don't you just take a few moments just to think and say, Lord, if you're really there, show me you're real, because I need to change. So God bless you. Thank you for listening, and all the best. And I hope it's really blessed you.